You sit on your couch watching flickering black and white documentary footage, and a comforting sense of moral clarity washes over you. You tell yourself a clean, satisfying story that World War II was a simple superhero narrative, where the forces of light gathered together to crush an army of pure dark. Behind the eloquent radio speeches and tactical genius lay a staggering industrial meat grinder of global logistics, raw oil depletion, and severe moral compromises made by every single nation involved. Imagine walking into an expensive luxury boutique. The salesperson compliments your posture and sells you a $3,000 wool jacket. You feel like royalty, but what they conveniently failed to mention is that the suit was manufactured using exploited labor. The seams are glued rather than hand-stitched, and the store took a massive commission off your insecurity. National history textbooks are that salesperson. They sell you national self-esteem. They present a curated, heroic trailer of the past, sweeping structural compromises and uncomfortable alliances under the rug. We buy the fairy tale because it flatters our modern identity, shielding us from the brutal machinery that actually dictated who lived, who died, and who won. Ask the average high school student where the war in Europe was decided, and they will point to D-Day on June 6, 1944. They picture American GIs pushing the German army all the way back to Berlin. That narrative is a complete geographical and statistical fiction. Out of every 10 German soldiers killed, wounded, or captured during World War II, nearly 8 of them died fighting the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. The Red Army absorbed the full crushing weight of the German war machine for 3 brutal years before a Western soldier set foot in Normandy. By the time the war ended, the Soviet Union had lost an estimated 27 million citizens. Entire generations of young men were erased. After 1945, the global order immediately flipped. As the Cold War set in, Western nations could not stomach the uncomfortable truth that their primary savior against Adolf Hitler was Joseph Stalin. Textbooks systematically erased the Soviet contribution to make room for a clean narrative where democratic capitalism saved the world alone. We love to think about armies marching for freedom or fascism, military machines run on petroleum. A division of panzer wagons and a squadron of Messerschmitt fighters are nothing more than useless iron scrap without high-octane aviation fuel and diesel. Nazi Germany had virtually zero domestic oil reserves. Adolf Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union was driven by an existential oil famine. Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor is often presented as an irrational act of fanatical aggression. In July 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt imposed a total oil embargo on Japan. The Japanese military had less than 2 years of fuel remaining. Pearl Harbor was a desperate high-stakes gamble to secure petroleum before the Japanese Navy ran dry. The invisible logistical backbone of Allied victory was American Lend-Lease. The most critical supplies sent to the Soviet Union were not weapons. They shipped over 400,000 Studebaker trucks, 13,000 steam locomotives, and billions of cans of Spam. Before American trucks arrived, the Red Army had to rely on horse-drawn carts to transport ammunition behind advancing tank divisions. German superweapons like the Tiger tank were an industrial disaster, constantly breaking down. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union mass-produced over 84,000 simple, rugged T-34s that ran on heavy diesel fuel. Popular history is a movie trailer. It gives us 2-minute highlights of secret superweapons and heroic last stands. Real history is the full 3-hour unedited film, showing long stretches of factory ball-bearing production quotas and industrial supply chain management. The side with the better logistics and manufacturing output wins almost every single time. Carl Jung warned that when we refuse to acknowledge the shadow, the dark, messy, unglamorous side of human nature, we project it onto others. History class keeps our national leaders on spotless pedestals because admitting the cold economic calculations required for victory makes us uncomfortable about our institutions. Despite normal food production in 1943, British wartime economic policies engineered a catastrophic famine in the province of Bengal. An estimated 3 million Indian men, women, and children died of starvation and disease. Fearing a Japanese invasion through Burma, the British colonial administration destroyed thousands of local wooden boats that villagers used for fishing and grain transport. Simultaneously, the British government prioritized stockpiling wheat and rice for European soldiers, shipping grain out of India, while millions starved in the streets of Calcutta. Prime Minister Winston Churchill explicitly refused frantic pleas from local officials to divert shipping vessels for food relief. The sacrifice of civilian life extended to the freezing storms of the North Atlantic. The longest continuous campaign of the war was fought by vulnerable, slow-moving civilian cargo ships, the Merchant Navy. Over 36,000 Allied merchant sailors were killed at sea, trapped in torpedoed hulls to keep Great Britain supplied with food and aviation fuel. Acknowledging these events shatters the neat narrative of the Allies as unblemished defenders of human rights. It forces us to confront the reality that strategic indifference and the sacrifice of undefended civilians caused massive human destruction, even on the winning side. After 1945, French political culture promoted a comforting national myth that the population stood united in fierce underground resistance from the very first day. The historical reality was far more tragic. The Vichy government, led by World War I hero Marshal Philippe Pétain, enacted anti-Semitic laws voluntarily and organized the roundup of over 75,000 Jews. For the vast majority of citizens, daily life was dictated by quiet, exhausting accommodation. History textbooks describe the Allied bombing offensive as a surgical effort to destroy enemy armaments factories. In 1942, the British Royal Air Force Bomber Command explicitly adopted a policy known as dehousing. This strategy deliberately targeted the densely populated residential centers of German working-class cities to break the moral will of the civilian population. On the night of July 27, 1943, Operation Gomorrah unleashed a firestorm over Hamburg. The heat sucked oxygen out of the streets at hurricane speeds, melting asphalt and incinerating 40,000 civilians in a single night. The United States Army Air Forces adopted the same terrifying tactics in the Pacific. In March 1945, American bombers dropped thousands of cluster bombs filled with napalm onto wooden residential neighborhoods in Tokyo. The attack destroyed 16 square miles of the city and killed over 100,000 civilians in a single night, the deadliest air raid in human history. Post-war economic surveys concluded that area bombing was a costly failure. German and Japanese war production actually increased as factories decentralized into rural areas. Terror bombing hardened civilian resolve and forced populations to rely entirely on state rationing for survival, proving that when human beings fight an existential war, moral boundaries are crossed by everyone involved. As the war in Europe ended, the United States secretly evacuated over 1,600 German scientists and engineers to America under Operation Paperclip. Many, including Werner von Braun, who personally used enslaved labor from concentration camps to manufacture rockets, had their security files scrubbed by the U.S. military. They were granted high-level security clearances to build American missiles. We picture May 1945 as a joyful moment where peace returned and everyone went home. Instead, it was followed by the largest forced population transfer in human history. Over 12 million ethnic Germans were expelled from their ancestral homes and marched into ruined Germany. At the same time, millions of former Eastern European prisoners of war repatriated to the Soviet Union were shipped directly from German labor camps to Siberian gulags. Building historical discernment is planting a garden. You cultivate patience, double-check official archives, and face uncomfortable moral compromises. While the person chasing sanitized war myths ends up with scratched knees and nothing to show for their effort, the person who does the difficult work of planting a garden finds their reward in the clarity of the result. Shattering the comforting superhero fairy tale does not diminish our respect for those who fought. It grants us a profound, clear-eyed reverence for the terrifying industrial reality they actually endured. Examine the stories you were told, tolerate the painful truths, and build your own clarity from within.